Okay, so we are just going to wrap up that one section at the end of last week's lesson, so I hope you have that. Now I've thrown everybody for a tizzy. On the living creation, we had gone through angelic life and physical life, and point 3 there, our third Roman numeral, we were going to look at human life. That probably would be a beneficial thing when we're talking about life to look at human life. So, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time reviewing this lesson because this will be our third week into it. I guess it'll be 2 1/4, 2 1/2, but we're going to try to go ahead and get it wrapped up. But it's been an interesting study when we talk about life in general and the three main kinds of created life. So the third most spectacular kind of created life is human life, the existence of the human race. How can human life be described? Well, in the first place, it is unique. It's unique. Human life is unique. When compared with all the rest, how are we different? Do we not have physical bodies like animals? Yes. Do we not have personal spirits like angels? Yes, but the thing is this. Only human beings are a combination of physical, animal, and spiritual personal life. Nothing else in the universe is like us. Animals have no spirits. Angels have no physical bodies. Human life is, I want you to remember this here before this one sentence when we get ready to go into our other lesson, because we've got some interesting things. I don't know if we'll get there tonight, but as we complete the lesson, the problem of death, we're going to have a very interesting discussion about something, and maybe some things we've not really considered. But this idea of nothing else in the universe is like us. Animals have no spirits. Angels have no physical bodies. Human life is not only unique, it is also, here's the second blank, sacred. It is the only kind of life that is protected by God's own laws, the sixth commandment. You shall not, sixth commandment, life protected, you shall not murder. But even before the giving of the Ten Commandments, God had already made it clear that human life is unique and under His protection. Just after Noah's flood in Genesis 9:3-6, God told Noah's family that they could eat any kind of plant and animal life, but they were absolutely not to do what? Take the life of another human being. It says, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God He made man. These commands show how special life is. They protect human life only, not animal life. There is a qualitative gulf between animal and human life. Albert Schweitzer's reverence for life philosophy, you guys heard of Albert Schweitzer? His philosophy, reverence for life, is wrong, since he made no such distinctions. He preached reverence for the life of ants and bacteria, but human life is special and sacred, even in the womb. Human life is also godlike. Note, we are not God, not divine, never, but we are like God because we are made in the image of God for the purpose of fellowship and communion with Him. We saw this in the quotation from Genesis 9 above, and God announced this fact at the very time He was creating Adam and Eve. He said, let us make man in our image according to what? Our likeness. Well, why are we like God, while eagles and ants and lions and orangutans are not? Okay, so what's the qualitative distinction? We've talked about this in different ways. What's the qualitative distinction between eagles and ants and lions and orangutans? What is the difference? What's the soul, spirit, free will? Okay, what's the one word, the thing that we said that sums all that up? Image bearers? Yep. The concept is persons. Remember the concept of personhood and persons? So, because we are persons like God, which is the result of our being spiritual, not just physical, we have the spiritual and intellectual and personal capabilities of God, though they be on a finite level. We can reason and feel and plan and decide and act and communicate in ways patterned after God Himself. Why has God made us thus? Just so we as persons may have fellowship and communion with Him, the three persons of the Trinity. This is why human life was created in the first place, for eternal fellowship with God. But for this fellowship with God to be meaningful, it must be, there's an aspect of this, for when He created life, for it to be meaningful for His creature and for Him, there had to be a certain aspect in place for it to be truly meaningful. Freely chosen, yes. Free will, yes. There had to be free will for it to be truly meaningful. It must be freely chosen. What does God want from us most of all? Love. We know this because Jesus said the most important commandment is, you shall the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and foremost commandment. But for this to be true, to truly be love, it must be something we do because we want to do it from our hearts. It cannot be something robotic, something we've been programmed to display through certain outward actions. No. If love is something we choose, then it is, if love is not something we choose, then it is not real love and affection. This means at its very center, the human life embodies and is built around free will. This leads to the fourth aspect of human life, namely that it is, now this is an interesting concept. It is risky. Now, I'm not saying this is the case from our perspective, but from God's perspective. Well, why is this so? Because when God decided to make us in His own image, that means He gave us the gift of free will. After all the superlatives I've already used about the angelic life and physical earthly life, my next statement may sound strange, but here it is. Free. Now, I want you to think of everything that God created. Just try to wrap your mind around that. Pick out one or two things that just amaze you more than any other things or concepts that you might put at the top of your list. If you were to rank God's creative acts and actions and things that He built into this universe, and you would try to rank what you know about His universe in order, we could come up with some stuff that we all are kind of fond of or amazed by. But have you ever tried to think of, well, what is the most amazing thing that He ever did create? Free will is the most remarkable thing God has created. At least within the realm of this earthly creation, and maybe all creation. When God created human life with its godlike ability called free will, this was the top of the charts wonder-wise. Free will, in a sense, is the ability to create, at least to create events. For example, we cannot create stuff out of nothing. Only God can do that, but we can bring other things into existence that would not have existed apart from our free will choice. Every time we do something we have chosen to do, we have created a situation or relationship or a solution to some problem, for example. But most significantly, free will is the ability to bind ourselves in a love relationship with the Almighty Creator. We have the capacity for choosing to love God forever. This is remarkable indeed. Because of its potential for love, free will is indeed a wonderful gift. But at the same time, it is the most risky thing God has created, because it opens the door for what? It opens the door for sin. It opens the door for sin. If free will is truly free, then it must include the ability not only to choose to love God, but also the ability to choose to reject Him. Why do we call this a risk on God's part? Because God knew before He made the decisions to create free will beings that they would be able to use this free will to sin against Him rather than to love Him. And He knew before He made the decision to create free will beings who could sin, that would have to do everything He could. That He would have to do everything He could in order to save them from their sin. That was their choice. His love would demand it. And most of all, He knew before He made the decision to create potential sinners who would need salvation, that the only way He could save such sinful creatures would be to become a human being and identify Himself with sinners, and to suffer the penalty for their sins in their place. He would have to become Jesus of Nazareth and take upon Himself the infinite suffering equivalent to eternity in hell for the whole human race in order to allow sinners to choose salvation. Was God willing to take this risk? Yeah, here we are, right? And the rest is history. Of all the majesty and glory and grandeur and splendor that have been manifested in the creation of life, of living things, nothing comes close to the importance and magnitude of your personal free will choice to say to God from your heart right now, I love you, God, and act upon that love by first obeying the gospel. If you have not already done so, and then to obey God's laws from your heart for the rest of your life. Now, any questions or comments? Did everybody get what they needed for this? Everybody? Sure. Mm-hmm. Well, that's in the tulip where they have limited atonement. That the atonement was only for those, for the elect.
Why would they even have to have an atonement if it's already predestined to go to hell or predestined to go to heaven? Why would they even have
Well, still had to be a way for those to go to heaven according to other things. Yeah. So you still have to have that worked out, but to saying that the atonement was limited is contrary to so many biblical teachings. I mean, probably, as you said, the most popular verse in the entire Bible, for God so loved the world, that whoever's a troublesome word there for them, I would think. And there's a lot of whoever statements. So yeah, there's a lot of difficulty. And there will be some, now even more than that, we've talked about that in that system, when we talk about the presence of sin, and that God would choose some for heaven and choose some for hell, and He ordains everything. Every one of your actions and thoughts is ordained, it's causation is by God, then that also makes Him the author of sin. See, it's one thing to say that God created a set of circumstances that make sin possible. It's another thing to say that He caused it. You guys understand that distinction, why that's important? See, if love, and we've said this before, the the presence of love in free will beings presupposes free will. Right? Remember we talked about that a long time ago? And so when we talk about, when it says the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God, and then love your neighbor as yourself, those imply free will decisions. And if we don't have a way, if we don't have a way to deal with sin, then we make God the author of sin in the Calvin. Now, that some of your hardcore 5-point Calvinists will say, I don't have a problem with that. If you read some of them, see, there'll be some of that TULIP, that acronym, those 5 points will say, well, we work with 2 or 3 of them, but if you have a full 5-point Calvinist, they will, some will, if they're honest, they'll say that we don't have a problem with God being the author of sin. Now, I couldn't get there. But we've talked about that quite a bit too. But that's an interesting thing that you brought out there for sure. All right, any other thoughts or comments about the living creation? Okay, well, let's move on to the next one then. And we're going to be talking now in this section about who is man, the problem of death. Now, like I said this morning, it seems pretty simple and pretty obvious, right? The problem of death is its problem. But we really need to understand certain aspects of it. And I've got a question coming up, and it's a Danny Kelly special. If you get the answer to it. Now, the part of this one, that the way that we're asking it here, it's a fair question, unlike his, but it's still a good one. Because I bet you, well, you guys are a pretty impressive bunch. You might get it. But it's one that, if you really think about it, we'll see. We'll see when we get there. You want it right now? All right, let's do it now before we get there. When did the first death occur? Okay, animal death. So we're okay. Who else? Anybody else have an answer to that? When did the first death occur? That when God clothed Adam and Eve, that he had to kill an animal in order to get the skins for that, the furs, however you want to. What do you mean? What died? Man's innocence died? What died? Relationship died? That was the first death, relationship? Unbaited, yeah. Paradise died? Eden? So we're equating, okay. Animal life and human life? We can't equate those things, right? Abel was the first death? So the first human death was Abel? So he was the first death? There's got to be a spiritual death in there somewhere? It's not a trick question. We're going to go ahead and jump there, because go ahead and turn to Genesis. All right, let me make sure I want to find the right verse to work with here. Chapter 2, verse 16. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it, you shall surely die. Now, turn to Ephesians chapter 2. Verse 1. And you were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked according for the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. Among them we too all formerly lived in the lust of our flesh, and indulging the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, even as the rest. But God, being rich in mercy because of his great love, which he loved us, even when we were dead in our transgressions, made us alive together with Christ by the grace. So what died? What was the first death? Whose spirit? Not mankind's. Even Adam, right? Now, the question is, if we think about simultaneously, but the first death was a spiritual death. Their spirits died that day. You were onto it. Yeah, oh yes. Yeah, you were so right there. What died that day was Eve. What died that day was Adam. That day, in the day you shall surely die. Did they die? Yes. They died. What happens to that part of our being when we sin? That part of our being what? Dies. The first death was there. Now, first physical death, Abel. Now, we think about this. There's spiritual death that happens to all of us, and because when we think of a child that's born, are they alive or alive dead? What are they? Alive. All right, so if you guys remember we spent quite a bit of time on this in Revelation. The four states of man, the four possible states: body alive, spiritually alive; bodily alive, spiritually dead; bodily dead, spiritually alive; bodily dead, spiritually dead. Remember those four possible states? So when a child is conceived and born, they are what? Bodily alive, spiritually alive, right? Now that actually is what religious system disagrees with us on that? Calvinists and Catholics. They say that when the baby's conceived that they are spiritually dead. They are born in sin. Right? But we hold to the fact that they're what? Spiritually alive until the age of accountability. So I'll just tell you the story. I don't know, some of you, I've shared this with you. So, boy, this is a rabbit. We're not going to get very far on this tonight. So, we had been talking with Sherlonda and her school teacher. She has a book in her class. It's from Apologetics Press. You guys familiar with Apologetics Press? Okay, they are an apologetics group that have a wonderful library of books and materials and all sorts of things. They are from the Non-Instrumental Church of Christ, that group. Now there's a few little things in there about the instrument stuff, but not much of it at all. There's a million things we agree with them completely, right? And they have great resources. So they had a book, Am I Ready to Be Baptized? And so her teacher has that in the classroom. So we have Church of Christ folks, Christian church folks at that school. So that book's in the classroom for the kids to read. Right? And she said Sherlana's been reading this and interested in it. We've been talking to her, all the teachers that work with her here and whatnot. And so we've had different discussions over the last 6 months, maybe to a year. And there was never that moment until Resurrection Sunday night. Now think about this. This is a good way to go about it. This is a good way to go about it, is to die spiritually and be made alive in the same day. Because when we talk about the age of accountability, we're talking about that point in time when you become responsible for your sins, and that's, so what was different about this discussion, we're driving home from my mom's on Resurrection Sunday, and I don't know how we got started talking on it. And so she starts, I'm sure she was processing all the things she had seen that day. And then Friday night, we went to Liberty and heard the Meltons sing and got to experience all that. And then Saturday and Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, and she was here for the sunrise service, all that. So she's processing all this stuff. So now this discussion was different because I asked the question, what does that mean for you if we're getting in a car wreck? And so I still have the little mirror there so I can keep an eye on her. And it was like her face just dropped. To think of it in these terms, she spiritually died right then. But that's what happened. But thank goodness we didn't wreck. What did she say? She said when we were leaving the house after we had called a few people, we got home, and she said something like, "You better drive, not mommy." Now that was on mommy. Now she's come back and got me the other day. We were driving to her cooking class. And she said, "Daddy, come on. I think I just saw a kid on a tricycle just go past us." So that was funny. I tend to don't drive too fast, but Kelly, she's got that Kelly blood in her, and she drives. She got a lead foot. She has a heavily weighted plantar aspect. So what was beneficial in that is she wasn't spiritually dead for long, which is a good thing. The scary part is a lot of people live their lives spiritually dead. They don't even know it. Where they're responsible for their sin. So the first death was, it says, and that's something that hit me. It says, "For in that day you will die." Well, we kind of think, well, they didn't really die. Oh, yes, they did. And so we'll get there when we talk about I have another question for you, too. We're going to have some other things we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And we'll get there here on this section. I want you to start thinking about this. Now, so far in this series of lessons of life and death, the key word has been life. God is the living God, the one who has life in himself and is the creator of life. The living creatures God brought into existence fall into three categories, right? Angelic beings with angelic life, which is personal spiritual life. Earthly beings with plant life and animal life, which constitute earthly physical life. And finally, human beings as combined spiritual and physical life. So your two blanks there are angelic and human beings there on that first part. Now, in the beginning, God pronounced the living universe. What did he pronounce it? At the end of all of his creative works, before he rested, he said it was very good. But now, everywhere we look today, what do we see? Death. When we read our history books and newspapers, when we watch news reports, the key word seems to be... Okay, so if you wanted to be, I could go right now and be a program director for any news station in the 10-county area, right? Okay, here's how it goes for the 6 o'clock news. Who died? Who died? Who almost died? Who got hurt really bad? What weather thing killed people? What weather thing might kill people? The weather, sports, and some funny story at the end about a dog. And I mean, that's really about the half an hour news cycle, isn't it? It's really centered around death. History is filled with wars and atrocities of all kinds. Genocide, the Holocaust, countless Christian martyrs, numerous mass murders such as Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot and Mao Zedong, death by torture. Our biggest news items are about death, natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, mass shootings. We've been faced with the Boko Haram group in Nigeria, ISIS beheadings, and suicide bombings in the Middle East. We read about school shootings, parents murdering their own children, and other such atrocities. We seem to be living in a culture of death. Death by neglect, death by cancer and heart attacks, death by drug overdoses, death by drive-by gang shootings, death by child abuse, death by DUI accidents, and tens of millions of abortions worldwide every year. Death and death and death. What has happened to our very good world? It seems to be upside down. Well, in this lesson, we'll be looking at what the Bible says about this brutal enemy, which is death. So first of all, let's talk about kinds of death. Kinds of death. Kinds of death? Is there such a thing? Now, what do we say about life? We say that death is natural. Is it okay to say that death is natural? We were created in the image of God, so it couldn't be natural. See, when we use the word natural, we need to make sure that we understand natural from a biblical worldview. See, natural from an atheist or a secularist of any kind means it's the product of whatever chance and time, right? But was death part of the natural creation? Okay, so we know that the natural state of things was corrupted, cursed by sin. So when we talk about death as natural, it's not natural. It's normal. It's not natural. That's an important distinction. Now, our main focus here will be on human death, but we will begin with some comments on death in other spheres of life. Now, first, what about the invisible universe of angels? Is there such a thing as death among angels? Okay, so let's go back to the aspect and the essence of their life, right? What do we say about them? They're created, right? So that means they have life, right? And they also are persons, image bearers, right? So is there such a thing as death among angels? In the Bible, we are not told about the angelic world to know for sure how death affects it. As far as we know, angels were created individually and were intended to live forever as God's servants. The name angel means what? Anybody know? It means messenger. indicating that they would be carrying out God's orders in some ways. 2 Peter 2:4 speaks of angels who sinned. We deduce from this that each angel was created then with what? Free will. Since the ability to commit sin presupposes free will. Among the angels who sinned was the one we know as Satan. He was probably an archangel or a chief angel and assumed the leadership of others who sinned. Angels who sin are now fallen angels called demons and evil spirits in the New Testament. They seem to have no system or opportunity for redemption. Is there anywhere in the Bible that anybody's ever come across where we know of the redemption of a fallen angel? I know that many of you have studied these sort of things in a lot of different ways. I've never come across anything like this in the redemption of these beings. Is there any sense in which these angels die or experience death? Well, are we aware of any biblical text that refers to their sinful condition as a state of spiritual death? But human sinners are spoken of as being spiritually dead, so we can speculate that the same applies to angels who sin. Since they do not have physical bodies, we can confidently say that they do not suffer physical death. We can say that, right? Right? What we do know is that the angels who sinned are lost forever in eternal punishment, described as the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. This lake of fire, properly stated, is called the second death. And it is stated specifically that Satan and his followers, which would include all the demons, will spend eternity there. Thus, at least in that sense, the fallen angels seem to fall under the rule of Romans 6:23, which is what? What is the rule of Romans 6:23? Okay, that's 3:23. 6:23. The wages of sin. Did you say wages, Beth? Okay. I was going to give you credit, but he was just louder. The wages of sin is death. So, at least in that sense, the fallen angels seem to fall under the rule of Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death, especially eternal death in the lake of fire. Now, let's have some fun. I don't know if this is fun, talking about death, but it's not fun, but what about death in the non-human living species on earth? So how do we have, what makes up the categories of living things that are non-human? What have we said? Two main categories. Plants and animals. Right? Now. Well, okay. Rein her in, Gary. Okay, so let's go back to the original state of affairs. What was life like in those first days in the garden? It was good. Okay, so they were eating, right? Did they need to eat? Okay, they were told to work in the garden and eat and so forth and so on. What does that mean? They eat plants, right? Right? So all indications are by scriptures is that from what we know is that they were not permitted or did eat animals or permitted to do so until when? We commented very quickly on this at the end of the last lesson. When after the fall? After the fall is correct, but how far after the fall? When did it take place? No. When were they permitted to eat animals? I can see Donnie's itching. Do you know? You guys figuring? It's in the covenant made with Noah. Oh, all right, let's look at it. Noah. Yeah, Noah was the guy on the boat. chapter 9, verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the fear of you and the terror of you shall be on every beast of the earth and every bird of the sky with everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. And into your hand they are what? Given. Every moving thing that is alive shall be what? Until this point, was this the case? What was the state of affairs naturally in the garden? They were to eat seeds and fruit, all the things, right? Remember what it says that would be food for them? Okay. So, what does that mean? We go back to the original state of affairs. Think of in terms of life. Who didn't die naturally? Okay, well, that's an interesting thought. Hang on to that. What's it mean for hang on to that because that's going to be important. No shed blood. Okay. All right. Let's think of it. Okay, we're stuck on animals. What about the stuff they were eating? Okay, or the plants? What did we say about them? They're living. Was there death? Are we saying that plant death is the same? Is there some qualitative or qualitative difference between plant and animal death? Some say yes, some say no. A plant is a creature?
What I thought was interesting is that plant life was created prior to the animal life.
Mm-hmm.
So the animals would have no need.
Yep. And also, because we're only talking a matter of hours in between these things, really, a couple days.
Well, we know that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 20, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed
Mm-hmm.
that is on the surface of all the earth, every tree that's fruit yielding seed,
Mm-hmm.
shall be
Food for you. Yep. No, he's speaking to Adam. So, now, let's ask ourselves this. Do you think there's, how many, really, I'm asking this, not a trick question. Is there a qualitative difference between preparing a salad and preparing a steak? Like, quantitative would be in numbers, like, is there a numerical difference? Qualitative difference means it in its core essence, or in its, is there anything in a fundamental sense, is there a difference between plant and animal death? Or is it all lumped together? What do you think? It's not a trick question. I want you to really think about this. Okay, blood? Okay. Okay, so it can't sacrifice the plant. Let's just talk about just a general thing. All right. Now, some of you, this may be a little uncomfortable. Some of you, this is normal thing. If you've ever mowed the grass, have you ever had that feeling like, oh man, I'm really doing something here? You know, I'm hurting a living being. Okay. Now, think about that, and then what's taking place when and if you've ever taken the life of an animal. It's a lot different. Right? I don't know. I'm sorry if this is you. I'm not trying to be offensive, but I've never seen anybody mourn the death of a plant. True mourn. Now, you may be sad that a plant died because of something it represented, but who here's mourn the death of an animal? There's something different. There, okay, oxygenated blood. Remember Ryan was bringing some of those things out. There's something at its core. Now, animals were given as food in two? Right. Right. So it's permissible, but it doesn't, but there's still some distinction there, even though that they were given for food. I'm not making a case for that. What I'm saying is, now, listen to this. What about the death of non-human living species on earth? Many assume that all death, now see, here's the thing. Even death of animals is the result of what? Okay? Is death of animals the result of sin? But not plants? Okay, so there was, well, okay, but we're saying chapter 9, there's a lot of people that lived and died in between chapter 9 of Genesis and chapter 1, chapter 2 and 3. All right, let's think this through. Have you ever thought about these things in these terms? So plant death was not a result of the fall. We agree with that statement? But was animal death as a result of the fall? Many assume that all death, even the death of animals, is the result of Adam's sin. They think that if there had been no human sin, there would be no death among animals. Our author, Dr. Cottrell, says, I seriously disagree with this assumption. Now, there aren't many times, or I'm bold enough to say this, but there aren't many times when I disagree with him and I disagree with him. All right, let's hear his reasoning. He says, I believe that when the Bible says that the wages of sin is death, it is referring only to the human race. The soul who sins will die. There is no sense in which any animal were involved in the first sin that brought the curse of death upon the world. Some may say that animals are a part of the world that was put under the curse to punish human beings, and somehow their death contributes to human suffering. While in this earthly life, I see no rationality to this kind of thinking, nor is it biblical. All right, well, I think this is where it's going to be a little bit of fun. I'm going to let y'all chew on this like a tough steak. Let's think about this, because this is where I'm saying, when we talk about this idea of a difference, about that there's something different between plant death and animal death, we'll talk about a little bit more. And also think about the statement that Gary made, if animals never died, Would they have overpopulated the earth? Let's think about that. Now, I'm not going to say. I'm going to just have you think of that because that is something to consider. Now, so when we said that we were talking about death as being an interesting subject, and I mean interesting and important to think about, we're getting into some things here that maybe you've never even considered, and I think that's a good thing because it's stretching our thinking and causing us to have a really good understanding of things, because these fundamental understandings will guide us when we get to the really important aspects of this subject. All right, questions or comments?
So just so I make sure I'm understanding
Sure.
you.
Okay.
Are you saying that you don't think that God created animals for man?
Not initially.
Okay, and you're saying that Cottrell does think that.
Not that they were to eat, because there's no indication that they were given to eat. Now, they were told to subdue. The man was told to subdue, and that they were kind of the mandate over creation, that they were to be primary over all creation. But we don't see an early command about animals being food for man until Genesis 9. So initially, no, I don't think they were for food, which is disappointing because it's so good. No, I'm just kidding. But there's more to this whole thing. So does that answer your question? Sure.